that I would always protect them. If you would change the slide. And one of my favorite things to do when I was young was to sing to the trees. So you can imagine me, a little girl with blonde pigtails, 9, 10 years old, hopping, skipping through the woods, singing, "This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine," at the top of my lungs. And decades later, I am still shining my little light and doing everything I possibly can to protect the birds, the bats, the bugs, the bunnies, the bears that live on our treasured landscapes that comprise the National Park Service. And yes, I still really love to sing to the trees. So again, next slide. Today I would like to speak with you about 3 commitments that I have made that were the most significant in terms of my ability to lead in a manner that creates impact, by which I mean to leverage my strengths and talents to reach into new possibilities and challenge others to do the same. To shift the systems that maintain the status quo and deliver results so that the change that we're creating is enduring. And those 3 commitments are: 1, to be the best at what I do. The second is to be part of the solution. And the third is to keep an open mind. Next slide. My entire life is one of commitment. Simply put, I have committed to be the best that I can be regardless of what role that I'm in. The best scientist I can be, the best friend, the best partner, the best leader I can be. And every word I speak, every action I take is an opportunity to live into that commitment. Making the commitment to be the best at something is the most profound choice I have ever made. Having a commitment is one thing. It's no small feat to show up day after day and do whatever it is you do. However, a commitment to be the best requires us to give all of ourselves to the person in front of us or to the task at hand. It means we share ourselves generously. We become lifelong learners and explorers because we challenge ourselves to up our game. And it means we step up when no one else will. It means never ever giving up or failing to get up when you're down. And a commitment to be the best is a choice. It's a mindset. Next slide. So mindset, our beliefs or opinions about ourselves, about others, about the world, is my focus today because it's the basis of all the social and environmental problems that we face. Changing our mindset will be the most important factor in our ability to solve these problems. And I'll say the only way we can tackle the problems we face is if we change our mindset. For example, next slide. 20,000 people, mostly children, will starve to death today. Each and every day, 20,000 people starve to death on our planet. It's not a medical problem. We know that providing food prevents starvation. We have enough food to feed everyone on the planet. And we're able to deliver Coca-Cola to villages on every continent, so there's no reason that we can't distribute the food. Yet our children continue to starve. So my question to you is, how many people need to stand up and shout, "Not on my watch will another child starve," before we solve the problem? Global hunger exists only because we allow it to. It exists because in our current mindset, it's okay for others to starve to death. That's the importance of our mindset. Next slide. So the first mindset we need to adopt if we want to genuinely make a difference is a commitment to be the best at what we do. My commitment has become the foundation for all that I am, all that I can become, all that I will accomplish. For example, my mentor asked me to organize a leadership program for kids in one of our parks. And let me tell you, I really, really, really did not want to do this. I thought somebody else has to be better suited for this kind of program. Someone who has kids. I don't have kids. Someone who knows kids, someone who likes kids. I just don't do kids. However, she thought that getting kids into the parks and connecting them to nature as we connected them to their abilities as leaders would be a very powerful and profound experience for them. And I said yes to the project in spite of my massive resistance because of my commitment to being the best leader that I can be. Next slide. So I found a program that supported kids age 9 to 12 whose parents were homeless or nearly so. And we took them out to the park, this is White Sands National Monument, and explored what nature can tell us about life. So change is part of nature. It's part of life. It's not good, it's not bad, it just is. And when conditions change, such as this plant getting overrun by a sand dune, the plants have to adapt or they die. Animals also have the option of moving or migrating. Humans, however, have a vast array of choices when responding to change. First and foremost, we can choose to respond creatively, or we can choose to be a victim. Again, mindset. So we use superheroes to help connect the kids to the greatness that lies within them, the greatness that each and every one of us has. And one child brought tears to my eyes when he declared that he could use his superhero strengths to do what he believed was right and say no to drugs. That's the power of a commitment to be the best. Next slide. I work for an environmental conservation organization. I recycle, I avoid plastics, I have LED light bulbs, I buy locally sourced organic food, I conserve energy and water. That's enough, right? Isn't that enough to say that I'm not part of the climate change problem? When you've committed to be the best, it's not enough to not be part of the problem. Next slide. Being the best means that we ask more of ourselves, we demand more of ourselves, and it compels us to step into being part of the solution. And the second mindset is the commitment to be part of the solution. More specifically, taking action to implement a solution. Next slide. The National Park Service preserves unimpaired the cultural and natural resources and values of the National Park System for the education, enjoyment, and inspiration of this and future generations. So how does it get any better than that? That is the mission statement that gets me out of bed in the morning excited to come to work, and it motivates me to be the best conservation leader I can be. Next slide. The National Park Service is truly a conservation organization. Next slide. We preserve and conserve a variety of species and treasured landscapes. We don't extract any resources from National Park Service lands. Next slide. We educate the public, and we're continually greening our operations. We have data and evidence indicating that we are not part of the problem. However, if we demand more of ourselves and look through the lens of being part of the solution, we've got lots of opportunities that we can step into. Next slide. More than 300 million people visit our national parks each year. Many of those visitors take advantage of the educational opportunities that the National Park Service provides. And while we currently provide an effective transfer of knowledge related to conservation and the environment, we don't deliberately enroll our visitors in our conservation mission. And I'm working to shift that so that we demonstrate through our educational programs how our lives and livelihoods depend on the health of the environment. As long as we need air to breathe, water to drink, and food to eat, our life depends on a healthy environment. Through these programs, we're also creating linkages or connections between the actions that we take at home, such as recycling, conserving water, all that, and the impact on the health of our most sacred places in the U.S., our national parks. Next slide. I am privileged to lead the Inventory and Monitoring Division. As I mentioned, we measure changes in natural resource condition across 300 parks. So we look at air quality, water quality, vegetation, soils. We collect species information. And it is truly my privilege to have my fingers on the pulse of the health of our national parks. We're working to create citizen science programs to engage visitors directly in conservation action and promote science or information-based learning. Next slide. It is my intention to unleash a global grassroots conservation movement of people who are actively conserving biodiversity in their own backyards and working in their communities and workplaces to advance conservation efforts. I'm talking about citizens who demand responsible conservation action from their government at all levels, an active, engaged citizenry that is a social and political force for people and planet. And if we're able to reach just 10% of our 300 million visitors and inspire them into action, that's 30 million people serving as change agents. And think of the ripple effect. If each of those 30 million people engages just 10 people, only 10, we've got 300 million people, that's the entire population of the United States, engaged in solutions that benefit people and planet. In my mind, that is a powerful solution. So mindset number 1, commit to be the best at what you do. Mindset number 2, be part of the solution. My commitment to being the best solutionary I can be requires that I look closely at the solutions we're trying to achieve, because I have to make sure they're the best, right? And do you know what I found when I looked at them? The solutions that we work towards in the environmental community are based in the mindset of survival. And personally, surviving is not enough for me. I want to thrive. I want to live on a thriving planet, and I want all people on our planet to be able to thrive. Next slide. So let's look at the concept of sustainability. The concept implies that we do no harm, so the system can be maintained. So we do, as little as possible in terms of impact, so that we don't compromise the balance of the system. But inherent in this concept is the question of how much can we have, how much can we take before we lose the integrity of the ecosystem, before we push it off a cliff? And what if we could do better than do no harm? What if we could benefit ourselves and the planet through our activities every day, instead of destroying ourselves? Next slide. And it's the same thing with climate change. We engage in mitigation and adaptation strategies. So with mitigation, we're trying to eliminate or reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And with that adaptation, we're working to increase resilience, really our ability to cope with climate change. And to be clear, we have to survive in order to move into thriving. So in no way am I suggesting that we discontinue our mitigation and sustainability efforts. I'm absolutely not suggesting that. My purpose here is to inspire us to grow and evolve our thinking so that we step into a future we wish to create rather than simply trying to restore what once was. The strategies we use to maintain a surviving environment, I'm going to suggest, are different from those that we would use to steward a thriving environment. Next slide. So we have a lot of work to do in this arena. First, we don't have a definition of thriving in the context of the environment. Currently, we define environmental health or ecosystem integrity in a manner that's equivalent to determining that people are healthy based on the fact that we're walking and talking. And second, we don't really know how to steward the environment. Currently, we try and keep things as they once were. We kill weeds, we restore habitats to maintain a desired condition based on what they used to be, or what we think it used to be. And we utterly fail to recognize that landscapes are dynamic. Next slide. National parks in the United States are considered to be among the most unaltered or pristine landscapes that we have on the planet. And we have the opportunity to try and describe the elements of a thriving environment using national park lands. And we're working with park managers to shift our management paradigm to one derived from science-based learning via a process akin to the adaptive management cycle, so that we learn how to steward the landscape. Next slide. And our inventory and monitoring data serve as the basis for all of this stewardship work, trying to describe a thriving environment and working on learning how to do stewardship. So far, we've discussed two choices or mindsets that I view as critical. The first is committing to be the best at what you do. Anything else really is just a waste of time. And the second is choosing to be part of the solution. Both of these choices lead us to being accountable for the circumstances in our lives, but together they lead us toward a new and creative solutions that move us from a mindset of survival to one of thriving, from doing no harm to being a force and source of activity that benefits people and planet. The third choice is to open our minds. Next slide. The environment has always been a source of inspiration for me, a source of beauty, a place where I feel at home. It shows me how to live. When I'm struggling with a situation in my life, I look at a river with its rapids followed by smooth glides, and I know that this too shall pass. Next slide. Flowers model courage with their fragile faces turned towards the sun. Next slide. There we go. And if I'm telling the truth, 20 years ago, I really did not like people, and I didn't care at all about our social issues. Honestly, I figured that we make our own beds, we can lay in them, or we can make a different choice, we can get a different bed. I saw the environment, however, as innocent, as a victim of our greed and carelessness. Next slide. I didn't understand how people could inflict so much damage on the environment. When I look at a clear cut, for example, I see a gaping wound in the forest. Others see a job well done. And some people think that as long as they look at the mountains and see the trees, that the forests are just fine. It doesn't matter that the forest consists of a single species or of a non-native species or has little or no resemblance to the original forest. And I couldn't reconcile these opposing viewpoints for myself. So I just exclude people entirely. I just wrote us all off. Next slide. In 2001, I drove from Corvallis, Oregon to Grand Teton National Park. You can see my route here in yellow. I didn't have time to take it slow on my way out there, so I drove along the highways, even though I typically prefer traveling by the smaller roads. And as I drove, I noticed exits off the highway in Portland, Oregon, in Spokane, Washington, in Missoula, Montana, that not only were the same stores present at each of those exits, the stores were built in the same place relative to each other. It was like we had taken those exits, replicated them, and just dropped them in along the highway in different cities. And it was an aha moment because I discovered that we don't do anything to the environment that we don't do to ourselves. We don't do anything to the environment that we don't do to ourselves. Next slide. That insight was a game changer for me because I understood not only the value but the critical need for inclusion, for creating unity. In my case, it was including humanity both as a determining factor and as a beneficiary of my work on environmental issues. And 15 years later, now, I see inclusion as a core requirement of my work. I communicate to create inclusion. And by inclusion, I mean creating programs, designing solutions that serve everyone, that serve 100% of us. So I communicate to create inclusion. I conduct planning and design programs to promote inclusion alongside my conservation goals. And I do this for two reasons. One is whatever our future holds for us on our planet, whether we continue to destroy it or we shift to creating a thriving environment, we're going to that future together. We are in this together. The second reason is because I believe that our disregard for others, the way that we disenfranchise, disempower, and objectify each other, is a primary source of the violence and pain that underline all of our social issues. We all have areas where we're blind. Our current reality is often shaped by fear and judgments that we hold, or by painful experiences from our past. And we can all open our minds to new possibilities. We can choose to do that. We can challenge ourselves to open our minds to new possibilities, such as a shift in mindset from surviving to thriving, and all the amazing possibilities that thriving holds. Next slide. I know it's not easy to choose to be the best, to choose to be part of the solution, or to challenge ourselves to open our minds. It requires tremendous courage and strength to live into each one of these commitments. It requires us to be like trees, digging our roots firmly into the earth for nourishment and support. In our case, we root ourselves into the universal values that we want to manifest through our work. Universal values such as dignity, equality, unity. Next slide. My name is Kirsten, and I stand for oneness with the earth and all beings. Oneness is the experience of thriving, the experience of joy, freedom, dignity, abundance, reverence for all life. The experience of using all of our strengths and talents to reach beyond what we thought was possible and inspiring others to do the same. This is the soil in which my life is firmly rooted, and I manifest this stand through the commitments that I've made to be the best at what I do, to be part of the solution, and to continually open my mind. Next slide. So I'd like to share with you how I live into these commitments every day. I focus on the outcomes, next slide, and I hold myself accountable for achieving those outcomes. So people with far more wisdom than me say that it's the journey, not the destination, that matters. And I absolutely agree that the journey is important. It's the how we do what we do. And ultimately, the sum of our lives, ultimately our lives are the sum of our journeys. The choices that I've described to you today are, in my view, critical elements of a successful journey. I keep my eye on the horizon, on the results I'm working to achieve. And for me, focusing on a desired outcome, specifically what I imagine I'll have when I achieve the outcome, gives me the strength and endurance that the journey requires. And my destination is a thriving humanity and planet. And let me give you an example. Next slide. I really do not enjoy hot yoga classes. The thought of spending 90 minutes in a stinky 104-degree room, forcing my body into different contorted positions, has no appeal to me whatsoever. And if I focus on how I imagine that experience will be, smelly, painful, difficult to breathe, so hot I might pass out, I'll never step into another yoga class again. Turns out, however, I feel amazing after these classes. I'm calm, I'm focused, I'm energized, I sleep great. Attending hot yoga genuinely supports my health and well-being so that I can live into the commitments that I've made. And if I focus on this outcome, I will never miss a class. Next slide. So I'd like to take a moment and invite you to imagine what a thriving humanity and environment looks like. So take a moment and get comfortable in your chair. You can close your eyes or keep them open, whatever works best for you and your imagination. And think of a time when you witnessed someone or something that was thriving. Maybe it was a child. Maybe it was the dandelions in a yard. Use your senses to try and feel how this someone or something feels. How would you describe their experience? Do they feel joyful, strong, nurtured, vibrantly alive? What are the qualities of thriving as you witness them in your imagination? What kind of commitment do you need to make to move toward this vision of thriving? And what one small step could you take today to move toward thriving in your own life? Next slide. We often think that leadership is reserved for presidents or generals or CEOs, and that's simply not true. Every single one of us can take responsibility and assume leadership in our daily experience, in our sphere of influence, regardless of how big or small it is. Like individual puzzle pieces, we all have a unique contribution to make. Start where you are on something small that holds meaning for you. Change or transformation doesn't only occur through new projects or new initiatives. It can start with our day-to-day routine activities. And sometimes our daily activities are the best place to start because the change isn't so scary or risky. Next slide. We resist stepping into leadership. We resist stepping up because we're afraid that we'll be out there all on our own. We're afraid we'll be susceptible to failure or to humiliation. But the world depends on us to unite in our commitment to ourselves, to our communities, and to our future. Next slide. When we unite in our commitment, we come together like trees in a forest. Forests provide food and shelter for many animals and plants. And when they grow large enough, forests can actually affect the soil that they grow in. They affect the environment around them. They even create their own weather. And when committed people unite to create a shared future, we are unstoppable. We can benefit people and planet through our actions. And we can create a future in which each and every one of us will thrive. We can create a future in which we all thrive. Will you accept the call into leadership? Into a life of commitment? Next slide. I'd like to close with a poem. It's my favorite poem. It's called For the Love of the World, and it was written by Charlotte Tall Mountain. For the love of a tree, she went out on a limb. For the love of the sea, he rocked the boat. For love of the earth, she dug deeper. For the love of community, he mended fences. For the love of the stars, she let her light shine. For love of the spirit, he nurtured his soul. For the love of happiness, for the love of a good time, she sowed seeds of happiness. For love of the goddess, he drew down the moon. For the love of nature, she made compost. For the love of a good meal, he gave thanks. For the love of family, she reconciled differences. For the love of creativity, he entertained new possibilities. For the love of her enemies, she suspended judgment. For the love of himself, he acknowledged his worth. And the world was richer for them. Next slide. The time is now for each and every one of us to be the change we wish to see in the world, to let our light shine. Thank you very much.
Okay, Kirsten, that was incredible. Thank you so much. What a beautiful presentation. We have a couple questions that have come in while you were speaking. So I'd like to ask you a couple questions and spend a few minutes going back and forth with you and our audience members, okay?
That would be great.
Wonderful. So the first question came in from the team in Grenada, and that question is, they're curious to learn a little bit more about your role and the place that you work, and they're interested in knowing how many animals you interact with and what kind of animals live and how many animals live in that environment.
Oh, wow.
You can approximate. I'd just like to know more about what that part of the ecosystem looks like.
Yeah. Well, so I work in 300 parks that cover the entire, the parks themselves don't cover the entire United States, but tens of millions of hectares spread across the United States. And just one of those parks, Big Bend National Park, for example, which is in the southwest part of the United States, has 400 species of birds. And so each one of those individual parks has hundreds of species in them. And we have wolves and bears and elk and bison and all kinds of things. We have sequoias and redwoods, which are the largest trees that live on the earth. We have bristlecone pines, which are the oldest living organisms on the earth. They live to be, well, the oldest one we have found is 5,800 years old. And they're these tiny, gnarly-looking trees that live at really high elevations. We have parks that cover the oceans and the coast, so there are corals and fishes and whales and manatees and wide variety of species and landscapes, mountains and deserts and, like I said, coastlines and grasslands and everything in between.
Okay, that's absolutely incredible. We've also had a couple different questions come in from Trinidad and Tobago. One of the first questions was around as business owners, how can a business create sustainability plans and metrics that make a difference in the world, from your point of view?
So, from my point of view, as I mentioned, sustainability is a mindset of survival. Right now, virtually everything that we do on the planet, from how we grow our food to how we do manufacturing, how we do housing, certainly in the Western world, it creates destruction of the environment. And so the question I would pose for you is, how can you operate your business in a way that supports the environment, that actually benefits the environment? So for example, and I don't know your particular business, but with growing food, I think there's huge potential to grow food in a way that I have this vision of like taking the principles of hydroponics and having layers of growing surfaces, dirt, fields, sort of stacked on each other, on top of each other, and then having the water sort of percolate through, because that mimics wetland activities. As the water percolates through and purifies the water, you can flood and inundate surfaces, which mimics the it mimics the flooding that happens in rivers and that creates our really rich soils that we have in valleys. And also, it would use a whole lot less space so that we can return a lot of those agricultural lands back to the earth, back to, wild grasslands or whatever, forests, rainforests, whatever it is they used to be. And so I would encourage you to challenge yourself to see how you can operate, how you can contribute to your customers in a way that's genuinely beneficial to them and to the planet. I hope that answers your question.
Yes, absolutely. That was a fantastic answer. One of the other questions is, I'm wondering if this can be a tough one to answer, but what are your own personal key sustainability metrics and what you're working on?
That's a great question. So I have, in my inventory and monitoring program, I have about 450 staff that are spread across the country, and they're the ones that are out actually with their feet, in the mud, collecting information. And I am constantly inspiring them or encouraging them to shift the way that we collect some of our data so that we're less destructive. In my opinion, a lot of the ways, I find it astounding as scientists how much life we destroy in order to study it. And so we're constantly pushing ourselves to collect information in a way that has minimal impact on the Earth. We're constantly trying to reduce, travel times and those kinds of things. And we set goals for ourselves that I think are very positive in terms of how we operate. And I mean positive in terms of the conservation and the benefit that we provide. And we look at, how, because we collect all the scientific information that park managers use in order to manage park resources. And so we're looking at the impact on species. How are we, through our stewardship actions, through the information we provide, how is habitat complexity increasing? How is biodiversity increasing? And because to me, the thriving environment piece, the definition of it depends on biodiversity, habitat complexity, and processes, ecological processes being intact in order to sustain the habitat and biodiversity. And so from an operational point of view of my program, those are the kinds of things that we look at. For the work that I do that we do in citizen science and around our educational programs, we're working to create those kinds of metrics. And we're trying to create communities of practice within communities. So we have a number of national parks that are associated with different communities, and we do a lot of work in communities. And so we're working to sort of track them and find out how they're doing in terms of activating grassroots movements. And we're trying to create metrics like the Fish and Wildlife Service, which is another land management agency in the U.S., provides people little awards. You can be certified if you have biodiversity in your backyard by, bringing in bird baths or bird feeders, or planting native plants, for example, or wildflowers, so you have a pollinator garden. And so we're working to create those types of programs and tracking how many people get involved in those. And they're not quite to the level that I want them to be at in terms of how we measure and document the impact that we're having, but they're moving us along that route.
Okay, and then we have a follow-up question, which is for you personally, again, when you're working with the various plants, what is your favorite plant to work with in terms of what you feel most passionate about that's going to make a difference in the future? Pick a favorite.
Oh my gosh.
Are any specific anecdotes of programs you guys have put in place that you feel maybe you would recommend to others? A lot of the questions that come in are just about well, how do I make a difference with my business or my community? So I'm curious how we can take learnings from what you're doing in more of a national park type context and turn it into something that's a little bit more homegrown for just sort of other types of environments that aren't as well maintained.
Yeah. Okay. So back to the first question. It's really, I pretty much love the environment and anything in it. But for this purpose, I will say a redwood tree. Trees for me are personally really significant because I love to think of myself being firmly rooted in those universal values, as I spoke, being firmly rooted into the earth and being part of the earth, and yet constantly reaching and stretching higher and higher and broader out. So it represents that tension that I try and create in my life in terms of being rooted and challenging myself.
Fantastic. That's great. It's both metaphorically and in reality a game-changing kind of experience. Planting trees, planting roots, creating something that strives and thrives and is so inspirational.
Exactly. So, and then as for your second question, what can people do? The shift from a mindset from survival to thriving is a big one. And so I have been thinking about this for, I don't know, maybe 2 years, because it took me a long time to realize that I was in a mindset of survival, because it is really pervasive in at least the United States. I would say that, certainly more than 90% of the people who live here are very much in a survival mindset. Same thing with the people who work in the National Park Service. They are struggling. They don't have enough time. They don't have enough money. They don't have enough something. And it's surprising to me how often I find that I'm still in that survival mindset. And it's like every once in a while I'll be, thinking about something, and all of a sudden I'll realize that I'm thinking about it entirely wrong. And so really paying attention to your thoughts and what you're what you're thinking about things, and, how am I being judgmental here? How am I, because I find myself wanting to marginalize people who disagree with me or who want to, to keep me from shining my light. And so it's a constant challenge to notice that in ourselves and to shift. And as I mentioned, we all have places where we can contribute, whether it's planting gardens, maybe community gardens, whether it's planting trees. When Matai in Kenya, she's dead now, but she won a Nobel Peace Prize for planting trees. I mean, she had the most beautiful, simplistic solution. She paid women in Kenya pennies to plant trees and to care for them. And it supported the women socially, it supported the environment because there were trees growing, the ecosystems were restored. I mean, so it can be really simple things that we do. But I think it has to focus on returning, at least from an environmental point of view, returning lands that we have farmed or that we have, we developed once and then just let them go. Returning those lands back to the earth, back to a natural state.
I love it. Thank you so much, Kirsten. The idea of thriving in, and as opposed to surviving in the environment that we're in today, I think is so important, and really exactly what we're trying to inspire at the Global Leadership Coalition with how we're treating our young business entrepreneurs, and really getting them to understand that all of the training that we're bringing forward is about how they can thrive as opposed to survive in all areas of their life, in their business, in their personal life, in their community. So thank you so much for sharing everything you had to share today. Just a fantastic, inspirational way to start off our Saturday morning and get us ready to move into some of the next talks that we're going to be going through in terms of skill building, starting with self-esteem, which I think is sort of the key to everything you've been talking about today. So thank you so much for joining us. Any final parting thoughts or wisdom that you'd like to share with our group before we complete with you for the day?
I would just like to say thank you for the opportunity to be here. It's truly been a pleasure. And I would just say step up, do something small. Doesn't matter what it is. It's all perfect, because it's the important thing is that we are unified in commitment and we're taking action towards solutions. That's the important piece.
Fantastic. All right. Thank you so much, Kirsten. Have a wonderful day.
You too.